when I need to regulate with precision the height of my table saw disc, that is something very difficult to do by hand, so I decide to install this homemade table saw lift. I cut a piece of cardboard with the shape I have inside the saw handle. I use that piece of cardboard to draw that shape twice in a piece of plywood. I use a jigsaw to cut both pieces. I sand them and I try how well they fit inside the handle. After some sanding with gross grit sandpaper, now they fit perfectly inside the handle. I clamp them together. I drill 3 guide holes and I screw them together. With both pieces screwed together, now I use a Forstner bit to drill a hole from side to side. I put both pieces in the hole in the handle. With the help of a piece of wood, I clamp the pieces and I screw them together. And I check if the piece of pipe fits perfectly inside the hole. Later I will use 2 cross pieces to push this pipe to lift the saw. I will use this sled to push the cross pieces. I move the sled turning the crank. I dismantle this system from a table saw I had made in a previous video using an all-meter saw. To watch how I made it, you can click in the miniature. I dismantle the sled and I mark a line all around, centered on the insert nut. I mark the width of the plywood to each side of the line. Luckily, I have that distance in one of the sides. I remove the pipe and I cut the block in the line. I have to remove that screw so that I can take that piece of plywood apart. In that remaining piece of block, I will put the piece of pipe which will push against the cross pieces. I need to measure the distance from the edge of the plywood board to the middle of the saw handle, and I take that distance from the final position of the edge of that plywood board in the table. Now I have to put the system that holds the sled centered in the lines that I marked in the table. And I screw it. Now I can put the sled back in place. I drill a hole in the lever that blocks the depth of cut adjustment. I file it. And I think about how to put there that threaded rod. I bend that side of the threaded rod, shaping it around the motor of the saw. I insert the threaded rod in the hole in the lever, with a self-blocking nut to each side of the lever. But I don't tighten them against the lever. I insert the other end of the rod in the hole I made in that kind of wooden knob, and I hold it with a couple of nuts. Because I don't have a riving knife, I use a couple of nails behind the saw disc. I am not sure if this is safe, but I never had any problem with those nails. I cut a piece of plywood to make the cross pieces. I set the saw to its full depth of cut, and I move the sled until it is right in the vertical. And now I measure the distance between the pipes. I cut two pieces that are 4 cm longer than that distance, and I draw a round shape on each end of both pieces. I clamp both cross pieces together, and I drill a hole on each end. I cut the round shape in the ends, and I sand them. I insert the copper pipe, and I put the cross pieces in place. I drill guide holes, and I screw both cross pieces to the piece of pipe. But now I realize that the cross pieces hit the button that blocks the trigger, and I am tempted to cut it, but I decided to dismantle the cross pieces, and I put a spacer to each side. Now I have to drill new guide holes to screw the cross pieces to the pipe, and now they don't hit the button. Now I can attach the cross pieces to the piece of pipe in the sled. I also need to put there two spacers. Here I don't screw the cross pieces to the pipe. Everything fits tight, and I think they will stay in place. I use that hook to hold the rod. If I hold it higher, the problem is that when I lift the saw, the motor pushes against the rod, and that releases the lever. But in this position, I hit it when I move the crank, so I have to pull the rod to unblock the lever, and I leave the rod hanging. Then I move the crank. I block the lever pushing the rod, and finally I rest the rod in the hook. I still has a small deviation from the perpendicular, but I think I can fix it with a couple of thin shims between the metallic base of the saw and the plywood top. Anyway, I have used this saw for months, and I never had any problem with that very small deviation. You can find the first part of this homemade table saw and all my woodworking videos in my YouTube channel. And if you like my videos, remember that you can subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching.